Hey guys, picture this. You're stuck in a silent, smoky valley where the air smells like burnt incense and old secrets, and a cloaked figure whispers that he's lived longer than any Netflix binge you've survived. Yeah, that's Enoch, the original "I've got 900 years of experience" meme. Before we tumble down this ancient rabbit hole, smash that like button if you love a good myth overload and drop a comment saying where you're watching from, because I'm about to need all the moral support I can get. Now dim the lights, grab a comfy chair, maybe a candle, whatever makes you feel like you're about to hear a cosmic bedtime story instead of a history lecture. You feel the rough stone under your fingertips as Enoch steps out of the dust, his eyes glittering like the glow in the dark stars on your phone screen, and you hear the faint rustle of angels flapping like over caffeinated pigeons on a city balcony. It's wild to think that while we're scrolling through TikTok trends, Enoch was busy being taken up into the heavens, trading the buzz of Wi-Fi for the hum of divine choir. Talk about a career upgrade. So what would you do if a celestial recruiter showed up at your doorstep? Say yes or nah. In the dust-raised plains where early humans first learned to bind fire to wood, a man named Enoch walked as if he wore invisible boots of reverence. He rose before dawn, his breath fogging the chill air, and whispered prayers that seemed to stir the very stones beneath his feet. Neighbors heard his voice echoing through the rustle of leaves, a soft hymn that made the hungry wolves pause, as if the scent of his devotion repelled them. While others bickered over the size of their spears, Enoch tended his garden with reverent hands, coaxing life from the stubborn earth like a gardener on a reality TV show. Only his audience was far less glamorous. Yet the most striking sign of his piety was the quiet hum that followed him, a subtle vibration that made the night sky feel a little less empty. Word of Enoch's walk spread faster than a campfire rumor, and soon his peers gathered like curious spectators at an ancient street performance. They watched him kneel at sunrise, the sunlight striking his hair like golden dust, and felt a strange mix of awe and envy, much like watching a friend breeze through a marathon while you huff and puff beside a stone wall. Even the celestial beings, those glittering messengers perched on the horizon's edge, couldn't help but glance over, their luminous wings humming a bemused tune, as if they'd stumbled upon a sitcom cameo. One night, a chorus of nightjars sang an oddly melodic chant that sounded suspiciously like a modern pop chorus, and Enoch laughed, his chuckle rolling over the hills like distant thunder. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who walked with God was now the talk of the heavens, making even the angels check their scrolls for a typo. As seasons turned, Enoch's steps grew lighter, his feet barely touching the cracked soil, and the wind seemed to carry his prayers like fragrant incense. He stood on a cliff where the sea crashed into stone, the spray stinging his eyes, yet his heart swelled with a calm that could quiet a battlefield. Suddenly, a blinding light descended, its heat searing yet oddly comforting, and the celestial hosts opened a doorway of shimmering vapor. Without a pause, Enoch stepped forward, his robe fluttering like a banner, and vanished into the luminous veil, leaving behind a faint scent of sandalwood and awe. The villagers, eyes wide and throats dry, whispered that they had just witnessed the ultimate walk-off, a divine exit that would be retold around fire pits for generations. When the breath of the Almighty brushed the ancient cedar of Enoch's dwelling, the old farmer felt his world tilt like a roller coaster at a theme park. In a flash of silvery light, a choir of seraphim unfurled their wings, each feather humming with the scent of frankincense and burnt pine. Enoch saw the heavens arranged like a cosmic library, shelves of constellations stacked in perfect order, each star a dusty ledger of destiny. The angels shuffled about, arguing over the proper way to file a meteor, some insisting on a first-in, first-out system, others swearing by last come, last served like a bureaucratic after-hours shift. Laughter rippled through the celestial corridors, and Enoch's heart pounded with the same rhythm as the drums of a distant battlefield. The vision thrust him into a corridor of light, where the Milky Way was a river of molten gold, cool to the touch, yet burning with a perfume of ozone and roasted coffee beans. Above, the throne room of the divine glimmered, its walls painted with swirling nebulae that whispered secrets in a language older than any human tongue. An archangel, looking suspiciously like a medieval version of a Marvel superhero, pointed to a hidden pathway, a glittering staircase of crystal that spiraled from Earth's crust to the very edge of eternity. As Enoch stepped onto the first rung, the stone beneath his foot felt like gritty sand mixed with the smoothness of polished marble, and a faint echo of distant choir sang, "All-Star," in a tongue only angels could understand. Ironic, given the seriousness of the moment. He realized the heavens were not a distant, aloof realm, but a bustling subway system, every soul catching a ride on a Comet Express bound for the divine depot. The final tableau burst open like fireworks at a summer fair, revealing the true order of the celestial bureaucracy. Angels filing paperwork, cherubs delivering espresso, and a lone watcher, a cosmic owl, hooting the schedule of the universe. Enoch tasted the metallic tang of starlight on his tongue, felt the electric thrumming of creation pulse through his veins like a drumbeat in a rock concert. He understood that the hidden pathways linking Earth to the divine were not just tunnels of light, but also lanes of love, grief, and even the occasional sarcastic comment from the Almighty about humanity's habit of losing socks. With a grin that cracked the heavens, Enoch absorbed the secret that every star is a story, every angel a librarian, and every mortal a reader who sometimes forgets to return the overdue book of faith. When the vision faded, the scent of incense lingered, and Enoch stood wiser, his sandals scuffed but his spirit soaring like a kite caught in a storm of glory. Enoch stalked the moon-lit ridge where the wind whispered like a gossiping ant, and there he saw the watchers' sigils etched into the stone, fresh as spilled ink. Their feathers, once shimmering, now dripped with ash, and a faint scent of burnt incense clung to the air. He felt their secret sin, teaching mankind forbidden crafts, pulsing like a rogue drumbeat in the night. The revelation hit him harder than a sledgehammer to a sandcastle, and his heart thudded with a mix of dread and fierce curiosity. With a grin that tasted of bitter herbs, he whispered, "Time to call the boss and see if we can get a refund on this mess." Summoning the courage of a blacksmith facing a dragon, Enoch marched into the cavern where the fallen angels lounged like rock star roadies. Their leader, a towering figure with eyes like molten copper, smirked while the air crackled with the metallic tang of spilled blood and old wine. Enoch shouted, "Hey, you've been running a side hustle on humanity, and the customer service line is closed." The confrontation erupted into a debate that rattled the stone pillars, each word a hammer strike against their pride. When the leader finally lowered his glorious plume, the ground smelled of sweat and ozone, and Enoch felt the weight of mediating between celestial rebellion and mortal hope. Leaving the cavern, Enoch raced back to the villages, his sandals kicking up dust that glittered like tiny stars in the sunrise. He stood on the market square's wooden crate, his voice booming over the clatter of merchants and the scent of fresh baked bread, warning that the heavens were about to send a bill nobody could pay. The crowd hissed, some clutching their children, others laughing nervously as if the apocalypse were just another season finale. He painted the impending judgment in vivid strokes, fire raining like fireworks, rivers turning to ink, and the watchers' wings fluttering like shredded banners. As the last echo faded, a shy smile curled on his lips. Even in doom, there's room for a little cosmic sarcasm. On the night, the heavens thinned like old parchment. A sudden gust pried Enoch from the dusty earth, and tossed him upward, as if he were a reluctant balloon at a birthday party. The wind smelled of ozone and burnt incense, prickling his skin while celestial trumpets blared, more like a broken car alarm than a divine fanfare. He rose past the rooftops, watching farmers scramble like startled cats, their lanterns flickering like fireflies caught in a wind tunnel. Below, the village's rooster crowed, oblivious to the cosmic elevator that had just taken one of its own. Enoch's heart hammered like a drum solo at a rock concert, half terrified, half thrilled to be the universe's newest VIP. Above the clouds, Enoch entered a palace of glass corridors where light sliced the air into shards of gold, and every step echoed like a choir of clinking goblets. In the grand hall, the Watchers, those ancient sky sentinels, stood trial, their wings weighed down by ash and guilt, looking as disgruntled as a jury after a binge-watching session of courtroom dramas. A judge with eyes like molten amber read out their sins, each accusation reverberating louder than a bad boss's mic drop, while the mournful scent of brimstone mixed with stale sweat filled the room. Enoch watched the condemned shuffle, their feathers shedding like old memes, and felt a bitter irony. The very beings who once taught humanity to carve stone now faced the ultimate rewrite. The scene left a metallic taste in his mouth, as gritty as old cobblestones under a rainy night. At the apex of the celestial staircase, a throne of living light unfurled, and God appeared, not in thunderous glory but with a grin that could outshine a Hollywood director's smile. He handed Enoch a scroll that crackled with the scent of rain on desert sand, its words spilling out like a binge-ready series finale, revealing the master plan. Humanity would rise, fall, and rise again, all while learning to love their own messes. The revelation hit Enoch like a splash of cold river water, shocking yet refreshing, and he felt the weight of eternity settle on his shoulders like a cozy blanket made of starlight. With a wink, the divine warned that even the most perfect plot twist can include a blooper reel, reminding him that grace often wears a funny hat. As the vision faded, Enoch floated back to earth, his senses buzzing with the echo of celestial drums, ready to tell the world that the ultimate story is still being written. Enoch descended from the sapphire vaults with a quill forged from comet-tail feathers, its tip glinting like a sunrise on marble. He landed on Earth's cracked stone, the air tasting of ozone and ancient incense, while villagers gasped as the sky cracked open like a torn parchment. The scribe's robes rippled with a faint electric hum, and his eyes shimmered with a starlight that made the night market lanterns look dim. He laughed, saying even the angels need a good coffee break after a millennium of silence, and then he set his desk on a hilltop that smelled of pine and wet earth. Around him, the wind whispered verses older than the pyramids, urging him to write. With a flourish, Enoch uncapped the celestial journal, its pages humming like a choir of bees trapped in amber. He dipped the comet quill into ink made from melted moonlight and phoenix ash, the scent sharp as burnt cinnamon, and began to etch the secrets of celestial mechanics, the choir of angels, and the terrible beauty of the underworld's rivers. Each stroke cracked the silence, echoing like a drumbeat in a cathedral while the ground beneath shivered with every revelation. He scribbled the story of the first sunrise, the taste of the divine's breath, sweet, metallic, like blood on a newborn's tongue, so that future seekers could feel it. A stray sparrow landed on the ink pot, pecking curiously, as if demanding footnotes for the cosmic joke. When the ink dried, the parchment glowed faintly, a roadmap for mortals that felt like a cosmic cheat sheet for the afterlife. Elders gathered, eyes wide, reading the verses that sang of hope and warned of hubris, their faces illuminated by firelight that smelled of smoked meat and rain-soaked stone. Legends say the manuscript traveled faster than any carrier pigeon, hopping from monastery to tavern like a divine meme, sparking debates that could outlast a rock and roll tour. Enoch's legacy cemented him as the ultimate bridge, the guy who turned heaven's Wi-Fi password into a public library, guiding generations with a humor as dry as desert dust and a wisdom as deep as the abyss. And somewhere, beyond the clouds, an amused seraph tilted his wing, wondering if the scribe had finally taught humanity how to read between the lines of eternity. One scorching evening in the mud brick maze of the sky cracked open with a voice that sounded like a market hawker shouting over the din of goats. It was the Almighty, who stared Abram down from a column of fire and said, "Pack up, leave your fam, and head for a place I'll show you later." He promised that Abram's descendants would outnumber the city's bakers, that they'd own more flocks than the kingdom's royal stables. The promise felt like a gamble, tossed on a dice that had already rolled a 6. Abram blinked, shrugged, and shoved his wife Sarah into a goat-skin carriage that smelled of cumin and sweat. He bundled his nephew Lot, who kept asking if the road had Wi-Fi, and a sack of dates, oil jars, and a cracked bronze idol that the locals called Good Luck. The caravan's camels clattered over sun-baked dunes, their hooves kicking up a storm of dust that painted the horizon a ghostly orange. Each night they camped under a sky so bright with stars, it seemed the heavens were scrolling a neon billboard, adventure incoming. Even the desert critters seemed to snicker, whispering that nobody ever left for a better barbecue spot. As the caravan trudged deeper into the wilderness, Abram felt the weight of a promise that was thinner than the desert wind yet steadier than a drumbeat in a rock concert. His heart thumped like a war drum, while the night air tasted of iron and distant campfires, reminding him that faith often smells like fear mixed with burnt incense. When the stars finally aligned over a green valley, he realized the great nation might not be a skyscraper skyline, but a handful of tents that smelled of fresh rain on loam. He laughed because if a deity could move mountains with a word, surely he could also relocate a stubborn herd of sheep that kept taking detours for the best shade. With Sarai's hand warm in his, Lot pointing toward the unknown, and the desert's endless echo chanting, "Onward," Abram stepped forward, trusting that the next chapter would be written in footprints, not in scrolls. Abram trudged into the sun-blazed hills of Canaan, thinking the land smelled of fresh figs and promise. Within weeks, the sky turned a bruised gray, and the earth cracked, yielding only dust and the whine of hungry goats. A famine as fierce as a desert sandstorm pressed his clan into a hard choice: stay starving or follow the ancient caravan route to Egypt. With Sarai clutching their meager belongings, they crossed the scorching plain, the wind tasting of salt and desperation. By the time the Nile's cool mist brushed their faces, Abram felt the weight of a promise that still glimmered like a distant oasis. In the glittering palace of Pharaoh, Abram slipped into the role of a weary traveler with a secret agenda, whispering that Sarai was his sister, not his wife, just to keep the royal eyes from coveting her beauty. The courtiers fanned themselves with papyrus, the scent of incense swirling around golden statues, while Pharaoh, impressed by the honest stranger, offered generous gifts, as if he were auditioning for a reality TV show called Ancient House Hunters. Abram laughed inwardly, picturing himself in a sitcom, the one where the patriarch lies. But the queen's sharp eyes, like a cat spotting a mouse, soon saw Sarai's scarlet shawl drape over his arm, and the lie cracked like old pottery. Pharaoh's guards, red-faced, confronted Abram, and the palace buzzed with the kind of drama that would make any Netflix binge jealous. Before the tension could explode, a divine hand slammed the palace doors shut, and a voice like thunder rolled through the marble hall, warning Pharaoh of the peril in keeping Sarai. The king's men stumbled back, the scent of fear mixing with incense, while Abram, heart hammering, whispered a prayer that rose like incense smoke. The Almighty guided them back through the desert, the sand now feeling like warm sugar, and the famine lifted as if someone had turned off a cruel oven. Abram and Sarai emerged into Canaan's renewed fields, their feet sinking into soft, green grass for the first time in months. With a grin as bright as sunrise, Abram clutched the promise anew, knowing even a cosmic reality show twist couldn't shake his trust. Under a vault of desert night, the sky exploded with 1,000,000,000,000 glittering points, each one a whisper of God's promise. The voice of the Almighty rolled over the camp like a thunderous drum, declaring that Abram's lineage would multiply as densely as those stars. Yet the camp's hearth smelled of dry figs and disappointment, for Sarai's womb remained as barren as the cracked sand beneath their feet. Abram stared at the heavens, his eyes flickering between hope and irritation, like a gamer waiting for a loot drop that never arrives. He swore an oath to the unseen future, feeling the weight of destiny settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Months later, impatience gnawed at Abram like a desert wind eroding stone, and he whispered to his wife a plan that would make even a sitcom writer cringe. He offered Hagar, his concubine, to the Almighty as a shortcut, a biological hack that promised an heir without waiting for divine timing. When Hagar conceived, the tent filled with the sharp scent of newborn blood and the soft moan of a baby's first cry, echoing through the canvas walls. Sarai's eyes flashed with a storm of envy and fear, her hands clutching the embroidered prayer shawl as if it could shield her heart from the rivalry now brewing. The air crackled with tension, a simmering pot of family drama that felt oddly like a reality TV reunion episode, except the stakes were eternal. Little did Abram know that Ishmael's birth would plant the seeds of future quarrels, a saga that would later explode into nations clashing like rival sports fans. Yet the promise lingered, glittering as those same stars, nudging Abram to trust a timeline that stretched beyond his impatience. In the hush of twilight, he felt the sand shift under his feet, each grain whispering, "Patience, my friend, the climax is still unwritten." With a half-smile, he imagined the future descendants lining up like a massive Comic-Con crowd, each bearing his name and the mark of the covenant. The night breathed out a cool sigh, sealing the covenant once more, and Abram, still a little bewildered, learned that divine promises sometimes wear a cloak of irony before unveiling their true glory. When Isaac finally blossomed into a man, strong enough to swing a sling and still soft enough for his father's affectionate nicknames, God's voice thundered from the desert sky. God's voice boomed, as if the Almighty had just posted a dramatic spoiler on the heavens Instagram. Abraham's heart hammered like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. The scent of dry earth and goat's musk rose around him. He packed a modest bundle of bread, a jug of water, and a trembling hope, whispering a prayer that sounded half prayer, half nervous joke. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath, as if the dunes were waiting for the next reality show twist. The trek up the craggy slope was a chorus of crunching stones, bleating goats, and Isaac's nervous chuckle that sounded like a nervous sitcom laugh track. Abraham felt the sun's blaze on his back, the rope's coarse fibers biting his fingers as he bound his son to the altar stone. Isaac's eyes flicked from the horizon to his father's solemn face, a mix of awe and the dawning realization that this was no ordinary campfire story. The wind carried a metallic tang, iron from the blade, ash from previous sacrifices, mixing with the sweet aroma of myrrh that the shepherds had left behind. Suddenly, the weight of the moment hit Abraham like a dropped thunderclap, and he wondered if divine drama ever gets a commercial break. Just as Abraham raised the knife, a blinding flash split the sky and an angel shouted, "Whoa, hold up! No need for a barbecue today." The sudden brightness made the lamb in the brush freeze, its fleece shimmering like a cloud of powdered sugar. The angel untied Isaac, who fell into his father's arms with a sigh that sounded like a sigh of relief after a horror movie climax. A sturdy ram, tangled in the thorns, emerged as the unexpected hero, its hooves stamping the ground with a triumphant rhythm. Abraham laughed, half out of joy, half out of nervousness, realizing that the ultimate test had turned into a celestial plot twist, confirming that God preferred devotion over drama. Isaac stood beneath the shade of an ancient oak, its leaves whispering like gossiping neighbors, as Rebekah walked down the dusty path clutching a bundle of fragrant herbs. The whole scene smelled of sandalwood and goat cheese. Yes, goat cheese, because a traveling herder once bragged his wares, and the scent lingered like an old sitcom laugh track. When they exchanged vows, the crowd cheered louder than a stadium after a touchdown, and even the camels seemed to clap their hooves in rhythm. Their marriage felt like a timeless rom-com, only with fewer smartphones and more sand in the shoes. Yet beneath the laughter, a silent promise hummed, a promise older than any Netflix series, that their line would balloon like a popcorn machine at a movie premiere. Soon the tents of Isaac's household burst with newborn cries, the air thick with the sweet smell of milk and wet earth, as mothers rocked their infants under a sky that blazed like a fireworks finale. Each child added a fresh thread to the tapestry of a people whose numbers swelled faster than a social media follower count after a viral meme. Shepherds joked that the pastures would need a traffic cop for sheep, because the flock multiplied like rabbits on a caffeine binge. Even the desert wind seemed to carry the echo of the ancient oath, rustling through palm fronds with a tone that was equal parts warning and encouragement. In the evenings, elders gathered around a crackling fire, swapping stories that tasted of cumin and iron, reminding everyone that the promise was not a fleeting trend, but a permanent subscription to hope. Meanwhile, Abraham, the original patriarch with a beard that could host a small bird sanctuary, settled into his twilight years with the calm of a monk who just finished his last meditation session. He passed away beneath a canopy of stars that glittered like sequins on a celebrity's red carpet gown, his breath fading as softly as a lullaby humming from a wind chime. The mourners wrapped his body in linen scented with myrrh, the fragrance wrapping the air like a warm blanket on a chilly night. As they buried him, a gentle breeze whispered through the dunes, seeming to say, "The legacy isn't a one-time box office hit. It's a saga that will stream forever." And so the nation that grew from his seed marched onward, their faith in the promise as stubbornly persistent as a sequel franchise that refuses to end. In the golden hush of Midian's oasis, Moses knelt on sun-baked stones, coaxing a stubborn goat into the shade of a palm frond. The bleating chorus rose like a desert band karaoke, while the sand whispered under his sandals, gritty as old parchment. He laughed half-mad, that his former life of silk robes felt as distant as a Netflix bin he'd never watched. Jethro's men watched the former Egyptian prince turn into a low-tech shepherd, a role that fit him like a well-worn sandal. Yet every time his hand brushed the coarse wool, a flicker of royalty stirred, as if a crown had been tucked into his pocket. At night the desert cooled, and the campfire's smoke curled like ancient hieroglyphs, reminding Moses of gilded corridors and the echo of his mother's lullabies. He could still taste the honeyed perfume of palace incense, a sharp contrast to the salty tang of goat milk that clung to his beard. Sometimes the wind carried a phantom drumbeat, and his heart thumped in rhythm with a forgotten army's march, stirring a restless yearning for purpose. He tried to drown the memory with the grunt of his flock, but the desert's silence was as stubborn as a teenage intern refusing to delete a meme. In those moments, The weight of his past sat heavy on his shoulders, like a sandbag disguised as a royal scepter. One scorching afternoon, a flame leapt from a clump of bushes, not to eat the dry brush but to hover, orange and humming, as if the sun had taken a coffee break. Moses froze, the heat prickling his skin, while the shepherds muttered about the burning bush like it were a celebrity cameo in a mythic reality show. The fire spoke without a voice, its crackle vibrating like a bass line that shook the very dust at his feet, and Moses felt the old prince inside him straighten up. He realized the call was not a polite email from a distant CEO, but a direct line invitation to lead, and his heart raced like a chariot in a blockbuster trailer. With a grin that blended awe and irony, he stepped forward, ready to trade his shepherd's crook for a staff that would part seas and rewrite history. The sun hammered the desert like a malfunctioning oven, turning the sand into a sea of scorching glass. Moses, sweated to the point his robe clung like a second skin, paused when a lone shrub erupted in flame yet refused to burn up. The fire hissed, crackling like a gossiping bazooka, spilling orange and ash into the air while the green branches stayed stubbornly green. A faint, sweet scent of resin mingled with the hot metal tang, making his nostrils twitch in bewildered awe. He edged closer, half expecting the bush to pop like a fireworks show gone rogue. Suddenly a voice, deeper than the echo of a canyon and smoother than a silk-draped bass line, called Moses. It cut through the heat like a laser pointer to a cat, and the name rang back at him, oddly familiar, like a ringtone you'd set for a boss. "I am the God of your fathers," it declared, making the very air vibrate as if the desert itself shivered in a shared secret. Moses swallowed, his throat dry as the cracked earth, while the flames danced a sarcastic jig, as if to say, "No, really listen up, it's not a prank." The voice painted a picture of a people shackled by oppression, their cries a low hum beneath the blaze. A whispering flame, more whisper, actually, beckoned him to step out of the dust and into a destiny that smelled faintly of ozone and ambition. The Almighty spilled the bitter tale of Israel's misery, shackles, scorching wanderings, and a hunger that made even the camels sigh. He demanded Moses' attention, as if the desert had just posted a trending hashtag, "Number make way out." Moses, who had been dodging Egyptian politics like a reality TV contestant avoiding drama, felt a mix of terror and absurd excitement, like being asked to captain a spaceship after only playing Star Wars in a backyard. The fire sputtered, scattering sparks that fell like tiny fireworks announcing a new episode. With a clenched jaw and a heart thudding like tribal drums, Moses realized leadership was no longer a distant myth. It was a blazing, blistering reality, and he was the only one who could answer the call. Moses stood at the edge of the burning bush, the flames licking his sandals like a stubborn microwave popcorn kernel, and his mind raced with self-doubt. He wondered why a shepherd who could barely keep a flock from wandering into a desert sandstorm was suddenly being asked to tango with Pharaoh, the most well-armed ruler since Darth Vader's cousin. The heat on his skin sang with the crackle of divine fire, yet the taste of fear was bitter, like stale wine on his tongue. He cursed his own hoarse voice, recalling the time he stammered in front of the Midianite council and got laughed at like a bad meme. In that moment, the desert wind seemed to whisper, "Are you really the guy who can pull a nation out of bondage, or just another reluctant prophet?" God answered with a show that would make any reality TV magician blush. He tossed Moses' plain wooden staff into the air and, snap, it twisted into a rattling serpent, then snapped back as a harmless rod, hissing like a disgruntled cat on a hot rooftop. Moses' hand, already scarred from years of labor, turned white as chalk and speckled with leprous pustules, smelling of ancient earth and stale incense. The divine voice boomed, Take these wonders and go. They're your cheat codes against Pharaoh's ego. Even the bush, alight yet unconsumed, seemed to giggle in ember-colored chuckles, as if saying, "Looks like you got the ultimate power-up." Moses felt the tremor in his knees settle into a gritty resolve, the fire's heat now a badge of honor rather than a brand of shame. Still uneasy, Moses tried to backpedal, muttering, "What if I'm a lousy speaker? What if I sound like a broken speaker on a speakerphone?" But the holy presence clapped, a thunderous applause that rattled the dunes and made the nearby goats stare in awe. With a reluctant grin, he lifted his staff, feeling the rough bark pulse like a drumbeat matching his racing heart. The desert night swirled with the scent of sand and distant Nile reeds, reminding him that the journey ahead would be messier than a Netflix binge-watch marathon of plagues. He stepped toward the Nile, each footfall imprinting grit-filled footprints that would eventually become legends, all because a reluctant prophet chose to answer a call louder than his own insecurities. As the first star blinked overhead, Moses whispered, "All right, let's do this. After all, who else is going to make Pharaoh listen?" Moses staggered through the desert heat when a bush erupted in blue-white flame that licked the air but never consumed the wood. The fire crackled like a restless campfire, spraying a sweet resin scent that tickled his nostrils while the sand sizzled beneath his boots. Suddenly a voice boomed from the inferno, deep as thunder yet warm as a mother's lullaby, demanding his attention like a divine Alexa. Moses froze, his heart thudding louder than the desert winds, and whispered, "Who's texting me from a burning shrub?" The holy presence answered, "I am the God of your ancestors. Step closer, and I'll give you a story worth retelling at the next tribal feast." Moses swallowed the dry desert dust, and the flame-filled bush handed him a mission hotter than the sun. March back to Egypt, face a ruler who thought he owned the Nile, and drag his people out of slavery. The voice promised miracles, staffs that turned into serpents, waters that split like a blockbuster special effect, so even a skeptic could picture the showmanship. Moses trembled, half amazed, half worried he'd look like a clueless tourist lost in a palace, but the divine whisper teased, "You'll have a front row seat, no ticket required." He sensed the irony of returning to a land where the air smelled of incense and the Nile tasted of fear, yet his feet already ached to hit the rocky road home. With a clenched jaw and a newly charged staff, he turned his back on the silent desert and marched toward the land of pyramids, his mind buzzing like a scroll of ancient memes. As Moses crossed the dust-laden border, the Egyptian horizon rose like a golden stage set, and the pharaoh's palace glimmered with opulent curtains that whispered of untold cruelty. The divine promise crackled in the air, a backstage pass to plagues that would make even the most seasoned Netflix thriller look tame. Frogs leapt, darkness fell, and the Nile turned into a frothy latte of locusts. Moses felt a surge of fierce resolve, his throat tasting of copper and his palms slick with sweat, yet a fierce smile curled his lips. He was finally the reluctant hero the crowds had been waiting for, like an ancient Moses man of steel. The Israelites, shackled and wary, heard the thunder of his voice and the crack of his staff, and a trembling hope rose like the first light of dawn over the desert dunes. In that charged moment, the story pivoted. The chains began to clatter, the miracle engine revved, and Moses stepped into his destiny, ready to rewrite history with a little divine flair. Moses stood on the cracked hillside, the sun beating down like a relentless drum, when a blaze sprang from a shrub that refused to burn up. The flames licked the air, hissed, yet the bush stayed green, smelling of resin and desert spice, like incense at a rock concert. He heard a voice, gravelly, like a prophet on a megaphone, telling him to take off his sandals because the ground was holy. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd fled Egypt for a marriage mishap now got summoned by a fireproof plant. With a shiver of both fear and awe, Moses realized the desert had finally given him a script. He brushed the ash from his tunic, grabbed the staff his brother had mocked as a shepherd's walking stick, and felt the wood pulse like a power cord in his grip. "You're gonna lead a bunch of rebels out of slavery," the voice said, as if announcing a sequel to an epic movie. "Think The Matrix, but with more plagues." Moses laughed nervously, the humor rising like a mirage, then remembered the promised land smelled of wheat and freedom, not desert dust. With faith as his compass and the staff as his Wi-Fi router to God, he turned his back on the quiet dunes. The sand beneath his boots crunched, each step a tiny funeral for his former life. Now Moses stepped onto the road that stretched toward the Red Sea, a ribbon of heat and hope winding through a landscape of sighing stones. The wind carried whispers of future prayers, the scent of burnt incense mixing with the sour tang of Nile mud he'd never see again. Every heartbeat hammered like a war drum, but his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon where destiny waited like a binge-watch finale. He felt the weight of a nation on his shoulders, yet the staff in his hand glowed faintly, a reminder that God's glow outshines any desert sunset. And so the shepherd-turned commander marched forward, his path lit by a burning bush that would forever be the ultimate call to adventure. The palace of Darius glitters like a sun-baked jewel, marble columns rising to a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations. Daniel, the exile with a weather-worn beard, moves through the fragrant corridors humming a prayer that drifts above the incense smoke. He crouches before the golden throne, eyes bright, and offers counsel that cuts through court intrigue like a sharpened scimitar. Darius leans on a richly embroidered throne cushion, his laughter echoing off mosaics as he watches Daniel translate divine wisdom into practical law. The courtiers gasp at the neat truth of Daniel's words, feeling the cool marble under their feet turn into a stage for something holy. In the shadowed alcove behind the throne, a gaggle of officials huddle, their robes rustling like old vinyl records. One whispers, "If Daniel's a superhero, we should send him to a lion-filled video game level," while another snorts, "Better than a boardroom PowerPoint." Their eyes flicker with envy, the scent of spiced wine mixing with the metallic tang of jealousy that clings to their cuffs. They draft a scheming petition, ink slick as fresh figs, promising Darius the thrill of a dramatic downfall. Irony drips from their plot like melted wax, for they think they are writing a comedy, not realizing they've hired the very man who can turn a den of beasts into a backstage dressing room. Daniel smiles, his hands steady as the desert wind, and thanks the God who taught him to read the patterns in the night sky. Darius, impressed, pats Daniel's shoulder, the silk of his robe brushing against the trembling throat of the conspirators. The council hall darkens as the official schematics are whispered into the palace's stone ears, the echoes sounding like distant growls. From the far corner, a door of iron bars yawns open, its rusted hinges singing a low, guttural note that hints at lions waiting on a diet of ambition. Yet Daniel walks forward, his faith a lantern that throws shadows on the walls, and the crowd feels a shiver of awe, as if the very air had been spiced with courage and a pinch of popcorn theater drama. The royal courtyard buzzed like a crowded bazaar, gossip curling through the marble columns as the officials huddled in silk-trimmed cloaks. Their envy festered like sour figs, and they slipped into Darius' audience chamber, whispering that the kingdom needed a single, shining deity, the king himself. With a flourish of his seal, the monarch inked a decree that banned all prayers except those to his throne for 30 days, the parchment rustling like dry leaves. The conspirators exchanged knowing glances, their smirks as sharp as the edge of a freshly forged dagger. Little did they know they'd set the stage for a drama more gripping than any arena spectacle. When the edict unfurled across the streets, merchants shouted its contents, the words echoing off stone walls like a drumbeat. Daniel, who rose before the sun's first sigh, felt the decree slide over him like a cold wind, but his heart beat steady, the rhythm of his 3 daily prayers unchanged. He knelt in the cool courtyard, the fragrance of cedar incense mingling with the sharp tang of night air, his lips moving silently over verses older than the empire. Each phrase slipped from his mouth like a lantern, casting warm light on his weather-worn sandals. The officials watched, waiting for the first tremor of fear, but Daniel's faith stayed as unshakable as the stone pillars surrounding him. Soon the conspirators hauled Daniel to the lion's den, the cavernous pit yawning with the smell of stale blood and cracked earth, a place where the beasts curled like living shadows. The lions, perhaps baffled by the unexpected soundtrack, settled into a lazy glide, their snarls fading into soft sighs, as if they'd been tricked into a Netflix binge of silence. The officials, hidden behind stone slabs, felt their triumph dissolve into a punchline, their plot as empty as a royal banquet without food. When Darius later entered, the den smelled of victory and a faint hint of rosemary, and he declared Daniel's God the true protector, proving that envy's trap can backfire harder than a badly coded meme. He lifted Daniel from the sand, the lion's paws leaving ghostly prints that glistened like spilled oil in the torchlight. The sun blazed through the marble colonnade, casting golden shards onto the polished floor where Daniel slipped his knees to the stone altar of his God. A faint perfume of frankincense mingled with the iron tang of the royal armory, and his whispered prayer rose like smoke against the vaulted ceiling. He ignored the brass plaque that screamed "No other gods" in bold Persian script, his eyes fixed on the invisible hand that guided him. Behind the throne, the courtiers shifted, their silk robes rustling like gossip-laden pages, while a nervous chuckle slipped from an official who thought the drama worthy of a Netflix binge. Even the stone lions that guarded the doorway seemed to tilt their stone heads, as if they sensed the defiance about to echo through the hall. Seizing the moment, the chief satrap strutted forward, his leather sandals squeaking on the marble as he brandished a scroll like a microphone for a sermon of accusation. He shouted that Daniel had broken the imperial edict, his voice ricocheting off the walls and stirring the scent of spilled wine and sweat. King Darius, perched on his golden throne, stared with half-opened lids, the weight of the crown heavy enough to make his beard quiver like a nervous caterpillar. After a beat that felt like an eternity in a silent movie, Darius sighed, reluctantly signing the decree with a flourish that sounded oddly like a sigh of resignation after a bad reality show finale. The ink dried as the crowd inhaled, the tension thick enough to cut with a dagger, while the lions outside yawned, unaware of the impending guest list. When the royal seal stamped the parchment, the echo bounced off the stone walls, a thunderous thunk that made the torches flicker in disbelief. The doors of the lion's den creaked open, releasing a musty breath of dust, fur, and the metallic scent of blood that seemed to linger even before the beasts arrived. Daniel walked in, his sandals whispering over the cold ground, while the king's guards muttered prayers that sounded like background music to a suspense thriller. Inside, the lions lounged like lazy heavyweight champions, their manets rustling, eyes glinting, but Daniel's calm smile turned the room into a surreal sitcom where the underdog had the last laugh. As the heavy doors slammed shut, the clang resonated through the palace, a grim reminder that defying a king's decree could be as risky as ordering pineapple on a pizza in ancient Persia. The night draped Babylon in a heavy, sable veil as Daniel stepped into the sand-slicked pit, the air thick with the musk of sweat and raw meat. A circle of lions prowled, their amber eyes flickering like busted streetlights, while their low growls rattled the stone walls like an ancient subwoofer. Daniel's cloak brushed the gritty floor, and his breath came out in short, steady clouds against the chill. He lifted his hands, feeling the rough texture of the stone pillars, and a flicker of defiance sparked in his chest. Even the moon, half hidden behind a cloud, seemed to hold its breath, watching the showdown between man and beast. When the lion's leader let out a thunderous roar, Daniel's faith lit up like a neon sign, cutting through the darkness with a calm that made the beast's ears twitch. A gentle wind slipped in, carrying the faint scent of frankincense, and the lions froze, their muscles loosening as if they just watched a slow-motion tick-tock of cats being soothed. The divine presence brushed the scene like a warm blanket, turning snarls into soft purrs, and the animals curled around Daniel's boots like loyal fans at a concert. Ironically, the fiercest of predators behaved more like a sleepy house cat, nudging his sandal with a lazy paw. Daniel smiled, feeling the absurdity of it all, and whispered a joke to the heavens. "Looks like you ordered the vegetarian option." From his marble balcony, King Darius watched, his face a canvas of wrinkled worry, each heartbeat echoing like a drum roll in a stadium. He clutched the royal seal, his palms slick with sweat, and muttered prayers that sounded like a desperate karaoke rendition of a psalm. As the night stretched on, the lions, now as docile as palace guards, curled around Daniel, their fur brushing against his cheek with a surprising softness. The king's anguish melted into relief, and a grin cracked through his solemn mask, as if he just witnessed the ultimate plot twist in a binge-worthy saga. With a sigh, Darius whispered to the heavens, "You really know how to pull a fast one, but I guess your servants got the best seat in the house." The first pale light of sunrise painted the palace courtyard in an angry orange, and King Darius burst from his chambers like a caffeine-fueled scroll runner. His sandals slapped the stones, echoing against the hollow roar of restless lions hungrily prowling the den below. He could taste the metal tang of fear on his tongue as the iron door loomed, its hinges whining like an old harp out of tune. With a flick of his royal seal, the stone slab slid open, releasing a wave of stale, animal-scented air that clung to his nostrils. The king's eyes darted to the shadows, half expecting a clawed surprise, but instead he saw Daniel, eyes bright as sunrise, his robes untouched by fur. Darius stepped into the pit and with a voice that cracked like a broken lyre proclaimed, "Your God, who shut the mouths of these beasts, is the only true ruler." The lions, looking as bewildered as cats watching a YouTube fail compilation, simply yawned and licked their paws, their snarls dying into a lazy purr. The conspirators, trembling like freshly baked flatbread, were dragged to the courtroom where Darius handed them a one-way ticket to the fiery furnace. No refunds. Ironically, the very men who plotted Daniel's death now faced a destiny more dramatic than any reality show finale. Around the den, the courtyard buzzed with the clang of swords and the sharp scent of victory, while the king's decree echoed, "No god but him." Word of the miracle spread faster than gossip in a market bazaar, turning Daniel into the ancient world's ultimate faith influencer. Travelers whispered his story by campfires, the crackle of flames mixing with the scent of spiced stew, as they swore they'd never doubt a single-minded belief again. Over centuries, scribes inked his deliverance onto tablets, and later, poets sang it in taverns where the ale smelled of barley and old stone. Even today, when we hear Lion's Den, we picture a man standing unscathed amid snarling beasts, a reminder that steadfast faith can outlast any roar. And so Daniel's legacy roars on, a timeless punchline to the universe's cruel jokes, proving that sometimes the biggest plot twist is simply survival. Elijah trekked through the jagged Judean desert, his cloak flapping like a battered banner in a wind that smelled of burnt sage and rusted iron. The sun hammered the sand into a glassy crust, and every step raised small plumes of dust that clung to his skin like gritty sunscreen. Word of the king's Baal bonfires had reached him, and he imagined Ahab sipping wine while chanting to a false god whose only applause came from flickering flames. With a voice sharp as a scimitar, Elijah shouted across the hills, daring the king to bring his armies to the Mount of Carmel for a showdown. The eerie silence that followed felt like a cosmic mic drop, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for the next act. From a shadowed oasis, young Elisha watched his mentor with eyes as wide as the desert moon, his heart drumming a rhythm that matched the distant thunder of the king's drums. He clutched a cracked wooden staff, feeling its rough grain remind him that even prophets need a good grip on reality. Elijah's words crackled in the air, and Elisha could almost taste the electric tang of prophecy, like the zing of a fresh lemon drop in a desert lemonade stand. A soft, invisible breeze whispered a promise from above, hinting that the God of Israel was planning a departure so grand it would make Hollywood pyrotechnics look tame. Elisha smirked, half in awe, half in disbelief, thinking perhaps the Almighty was about to pull a divine vanishing act worthy of a Netflix special. As night fell, the sky bruised into a deep violet, and the stars flickered like the eyes of curious onlookers at an ancient reality TV show. A sudden gust roared through the cliffs, lifting sand into a swirling vortex that glittered with a faint, otherworldly glow. From the heavens, a bright chariot of fire rose, its wheels spinning faster than a DJ's turntable, and a horseman cloaked in radiant light descended toward Elijah. The prophet raised his arms, his breath a ragged hiss, as the fiery carriage hovered, promising a farewell that would outshine any earthly spectacle. With a grin that could light the desert, Elijah stepped into the blaze, leaving behind a stunned Elisha and a world forever changed by a celestial exit that even the most seasoned storytellers would struggle to top. When the sky cracked open like a broken water bottle, a relentless drought rolled across the hills, turning grain fields into cracked parchment. Villagers swore the sun had taken a permanent coffee break, its heat baking the earth until even shadows seemed to melt. Elijah stood on the ridge, his cloak dusted with the scent of sun-baked clay, and felt the weight of a people whose prayers had turned to parched sighs. He raised his voice, a low growl that cut through the silence, warning the worshippers of Baal that the real fire was about to RSVP. Elijah marched to the desolate altar of Baal, its stones slick with the oil of burnt incense and the faint, metallic tang of desperation. He flung a lone torch onto the wood, the kindling sputtering like a bad Wi-Fi signal, then lifted his hands and shouted, "Lord, hear me." The heavens answered with a roar louder than a stadium crowd, and fire shot down, licking the altar as if it were a giant marshmallow on a campfire. The flames devoured the offering, crackling and spitting ash, while the Baal priests stared, mouths agape, as their gods went up in a literal inferno. Even the wind seemed to sigh relief, carrying the smell of burned incense and victory across the valley. After the spectacle, whispers turned into snarls. The remnants of Baal's cult swarmed like angry bees, hurling accusations that Elijah was a charlatan with a pyrotechnic hobby. He felt doubt gnaw at his spine, a cold draft slipping through the cracks of his confidence. Yet the sting of the crowd's hatred spurred him onward like a bad sequel you can't stop watching. Night fell and the desert's chill wrapped around his boots, reminding him that even miracles wear a coat of solitude. In the flicker of the campfire, Elijah sensed his earthly chapter drawing to a close, as if the script had a final scene waiting backstage, and he chuckled at the irony. After all, Even prophets need a dramatic exit. The sun rose like a busted lantern over the rugged hills as Elijah, cloak fluttering, strode forward with an angel perched on his shoulder. Yes, a full-blown celestial winged man. He slapped Elisha on the back, shouting, "Grab your sandals, kid. The road to Carmel is hotter than a desert mixtape." Along the path, a band of hostile raiders appeared, their snarls echoing off the cliffs like an off-key choir, but Elijah raised his staff and the ground trembled, sending the foes sprawling into the dust. The air crackled with the scent of scorched sage and fear, and the two prophets laughed nervously, aware that their journey had just turned into a biblical action movie. Just when hunger gnawed at their ribs, a squadron of raven messengers swooped down, cawing like disgruntled court clerks delivering a royal decree. They dropped plump carrion and fresh figs onto the trail, the meat slick and warm, the figs sweet as gossip in a market. Elijah cracked a grin, saying, "Even the birds know better than my mother's cooking," and Elisha tucked a raven feather behind his ear as a lucky charm. The sky smelled of iron and rain, and the rustle of wings became a ridiculous soundtrack to their feast, proof that even the heavens have a sense of humor when mortals are starving. As they neared the summit, the clouds peeled back like a theater curtain, revealing a vision of fire and water waltzing together in a celestial ballroom. Elijah's eyes glowed, and he whispered, "Soon I'll be upgrading to the deluxe suite above, no rent, all-you-can-eat manna." Elisha felt a shiver crawl up his spine, half awe, half dread, as a choir of unseen voices hummed a tune eerily reminiscent of a modern pop anthem about rising up. The wind carried the scent of frankincense mixed with ozone, and the mount loomed. Its peak rhymed with an otherworldly light that made even the most hardened soldier feel like a kid on a roller coaster. Thrilling, terrifying, and absurdly magnificent. At the break of dawn, Elijah stood on the craggy summit like a lone rock star awaiting his encore. A sudden whirlwind ripped the sky, sounding like 1,000 cymbals crashing together, and the clouds peeled back in a flicker of ash. From that torn veil descended a chariot of fire, its wheels humming with the heat of a summer grill, and its horses ablaze like wild Mustang NFTs set alight. The scent of burning incense and ozone slammed his nostrils, and the earth beneath him trembled as if the mountain itself was doing a nervous shuffle. Even the birds stopped their song, eyeing the spectacle like fans waiting for the drop. Elijah felt the fire lasso his robe and yank him upward, his boots leaving a brief scorch mark on the stone before he vanished into the blaze. His cloak, heavy with the smell of leather and years of pilgrimage, slipped free and fluttered down like a red parachute into Elisha's outstretched arms. The younger prophet stared, heart thudding like a drumline at a sports game, half in awe and half asking, "Did I just get a free costume?" As the prophet ascended, a wind of ash brushed his face, the heat licking his cheeks like a mischievous lover. Elisha, now draped in the stolen mantle, could almost hear Elijah's voice whisper, "Don't forget to water the figs." The heavens burst open, spilling a chorus of angels whose trumpets sounded like a Saturday morning cartoon showdown. Their voices rose in a hymn that made the mountain vibrate, a blend of solemn reverence and a cheeky, "Whoa, that's some serious lift." Light streamed down in ribbons, painting the clouds gold and casting long shadows that danced like flickering candle flames. Elijah's silhouette dissolved into the fire, leaving behind a faint smell of frankincense and the faint echo of a joke about taking the ultimate Uber to heaven. Below, Elisha stood, cloak draped, eyes wet, and thought, "Well, that's one way to avoid traffic." Elisha stood in the cracked courtyard, the night air thick with the scent of burnt incense and dry earth. The ember of Elijah's mantle quivered like a stubborn campfire refusing to die, casting a wavering amber glow on his weather-worn boots. He reached out, half expecting the spark to sing a pop song chorus, but the flame whispered only wind howls and the faint rustle of ancient linen. A sudden gust lifted the ash, and Elisha felt the weight of 1,000 eyes watching from the hills, though the only audience he could see was a lone goat bleating in disapproval. From the heavens, a voice rolled down like thunder over a vineyard, commanding Elisha to carry the torch of prophecy without getting his cloak singed. The divine commission hit him harder than a surprise plot twist in a binge-watched series, urging him to speak truth to power while dodging the occasional sandstorm of doubt. He felt the mantle's heat seep into his skin, a reminder that his words would scorch like a hot skillet on a summer's day. With a grin that mixed reverence and a dash of cheek, he muttered, "All right, God, let's see if I can keep the hype alive without any more dramatic exits." Word of Elijah's ascent spread faster than a royal rumor at a banquet, and the people of Israel gathered beneath the twinkling sky, eyes wide as if they'd just seen a comet perform a moonwalk. Their prayers rose in a chorus of crackling voices, mingling with the scent of freshly baked flatbread and the metallic tang of sweat from the crowded hilltop. In a solemn yet oddly festive ceremony, they laid hands on the surviving mantle, pledging anew to the one true God, as if signing a celestial contract with a feather pen made of fire. The whole scene cemented Elijah's ascent as the cornerstone of their faith, a story they'd retell over campfires, each time adding a pinch more wonder and a sprinkle of humor about heavenly Wi-Fi.